Hello, I'm Jacob Terry. I'm with CxAlloy. I'm going to be facilitating this discussion. The idea here is to have it be a panel discussion. Our stage setup doesn't perfectly accommodate that, just in the mic situation that we have. So I'm going to stand, but I will hopefully be doing less of the talking than our two panelists. I just said it a minute ago, I'll just say again that they're here, and so you might not be able to see them well if you're over there. So, if you want to shift over.
You may not want to look at us, so if that's the case, stay where you're at.
Yeah, or if you don't want to see them, you're in the perfect spot.
Yeah, right, yeah. Depending on where you are, yeah.
All right, so this session is going to be a panel discussion. We're going to be talking about the fundamentals of commissioning, aimed at folks that maybe are a little less familiar with it, right? The facility engineers, the building owners, and so forth. And our two panelists are, we have LaPera and we have Loren Morris. And I'm going to give them each a moment right now to introduce themselves before we kind of kick off into the panel. So Al, why don't we start with you?
All right. I'm LaPera. I work for Kimley-Horn. I've been doing energy auditing, commissioning, building design. I want to say it's almost 48 years now. I've been doing commissioning since about 1998. Before we called it commissioning, we called it making the job work, is actually what we used to do. So now it's just turned into a true thing to do. I always thought it was funny that, we kind of mirror what the military does with their ships. That, but only difference is we don't get 6 months to commission something, we get 6 days. But that all being said, but it's an honor to be here, and I thought that this fundamentals of commissioning would be a great topic, because there's a lot of, you think everybody understands all the different things that are part of commissioning, and I think today we're gonna, really nail it down.
Great, thank you. And Loren, how about you?
My name is Loren Morris. I work for TMCx Solutions. I'm based out of Phoenix, Arizona. I've been in the industry for about 30 years now. Combination of controls, integration, programming, mechanical design, and test and balance, and being able to wrap all that into the great industry of commissioning. And so I'm excited to be here. We were excited that you're here with us today. And as Al had mentioned, this is a class on the fundamentals of commissioning, the different types of commissioning, and what the kind of benefits there are of these different types of commissioning. If you're a building owner or a facilities manager, we're happy that you're here at our conference, and hope that you've had a good time here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm Jacob Terry. I'm with CxAlloy. We make commissioning software, and I'm a decent proxy, I think, for a facility engineer, building owner, where I have a decent amount of knowledge of the commissioning industry and commissioning process, but I am a software developer. I have never, I once or twice went out and looked at was the person on the other side of the radio while doing some functional testing early in my career. Just because they needed that help, but most of the time, I have close to zero experience actually executing the commissioning work. So maybe some of you are in the same position, you know about it, you got the basics, maybe you even have some deep knowledge in some little area here or there, but have some gaps in your overall knowledge. And I think I'm kind of in a similar position, and so hopefully my questions are some that you might be thinking yourself. All right, so first question I've got is, my understanding is that commissioning that 40 years ago there wasn't commissioning as an industry. So my question is, were buildings just worse back then? Did the trades do the work and not make any errors? Have we successfully conned the construction industry into giving us money for nothing? What's changed from 40 years ago to today that commissioning has come up and exists as a thing that people think is valuable?
Well, I'll take the age.
Yeah, I'm not that old, so Al, you're gonna have to take that.
I'll take the age before beauty question here. Many years ago, the cost of energy was not as high as it is today, right? And the industry was completely different than the way it is today. And I can tell you that for a fact. It's completely different. What we have today is the fighting for dollars to get a project under budget. And, you know, what mechanical contractors, before I only told this story not too long ago, mechanical contractors, before, when they would find something that was missing on a set of plans, they gave me 4 change orders to look at, knowing they only wanted to get paid for 1 or 2 of them. The other 2 or 3, they gave them to me so I wouldn't look bad because I missed something on the plan, so I was able to do that. Now, they don't do that anymore because nobody is assuming how the industry is supposed to be. So I think you got a better level of craftsmanship before. There were still problems, but it was easier to fix. But I think that is why commissioning became commonplace. They started caring about, you know, think about why commissioning even came around. About 20 years ago is when LEED came into fruition. It mandated that a project be commissioned at a minimum. And what that did is we started to find, and I think the industry started to find why buildings were not performing like they should have. Nothing nefarious, it's just that anybody involved in a construction project ever, right, the last 5% of the project, you know, they're beating the hell out of the control guy, they're beating the hell out of the test and balance guy. And so more times than not, I've gone to commission a job and I'll send one of my guys, you know, it's one of the things about being, you know, the old guy in the group, you get to go to the roof and with the walkie-talkie, and I'll go, all right, I just shut off air handler number 1, exhaust fan number 1 shut off. No, Al, exhaust fan number 2 shut off. Okay. So I'll go shut air handler number 2, exhaust fan number 1 would shut off. Nobody did anything wrong. It's just a set of a terminal strip. They just reversed the wires. So nobody did anything intentional, right? So it's those kinds of things that commissioning found, and that I think is the reason why it is so much more prevalent today because of energy.
And so maybe some of that was going on before, and it was more about the discovery of bugs, so to speak, software speak, right, of problems in the building that were there in the buildings, but were just maybe commissioning made us more aware of them is you know, one piece that you're saying. Loren, what about you?
One thing I'd like to add to that, when I started my career in the early 90s, it was the onset of the transition from pneumatic controls to DDC, direct digital controls. And systems were much simpler back then, mechanical systems and the control of the mechanical systems. When I first started out, we were actually trained in pneumatic systems. You had receiver controllers and the high-low inputs, and it's air, you know, it's compressed air going through there. And control was a much simpler routines that we have now with DDC, and we're going to talk about monitor-based commissioning, and systems have become much more complex, not just HVAC, lighting, access control. Every system that goes into the building systems are much more complex than they were 40 years ago. And because of that, the level of expertise and knowledge that's needed, you can't be an expert in every one of them. And so the need for an expert or subject matter expert to come in and help with those things that have really helped facilitate the need for commissioning in our industry.
Yeah, I agree with that with Loren, because it's kind of funny. I resemble that remark. I remember all the pneumatic controls, and I remember we went to electric controls, and then we went to electronic controls. And when they went to finally did the digital, it was known as fuzzy logic.
Yeah.
So there's been that rise in complexity too that's happened over the years.
And that's what's happened. And there's a lot of people that, you know, even though everything is all O's and ones, that's all it is if you think about it. But they're just traveling faster now than they did before, the O's and ones.
So the term commissioning, and Al, you mentioned this in your intro, the term commissioning, as I understand it, comes from the commissioning of a ship before it goes out to sea. That's sort of the origin of that. And my question is, you know, is there anything that we can today still look at in that heritage of the commissioning of a ship from the Navy that we could learn from, and maybe best practices or ideal ways to do commissioning today that we can maybe have forgotten or could still pick up from the practice that we inherited from You have any thought on that, Loren?
Well, a ship is definitely a building, is a living space for many people, floating city out on the ocean. And so the last place that you want a problem to occur and find out that you have an issue is when you're hundreds of miles from the shore. And so the Navy, they've been commissioning, Navy, Air Force, all of the military has been commissioning their equipment for forever. And so from in the handout, you have an example of the USS Alabama during World War II. And it took, as Al had mentioned, 6 months. They took it out to sea and they commissioned that ship over the period of 6 months, going from stem to stern. I'm not a Navy guy, is that correct? Stem to stern, front to back, right to left, starboard, top to bottom, yeah. So, especially when we get into ships and submarines, it's important that we have an environment that works for them, because it is a matter of life or death. And so going through that quality assurance process, making sure that everything happens as it's supposed to happen, and what's more important is what happens when things don't occur. How does the system respond to failures, to things that are going to arise as we're out on sea? And so that is really where commissioning was born, and applying that to building systems. In some cases, it could be a matter of life and death when we're talking about healthcare, when we're talking about critical systems. So we're applying smoke control, life safety, absolutely. And so applying going from top to bottom, left to right, making sure that everything is working correctly, going through the different scenarios of what we anticipate, alarms, failure analysis, failure modes, and making sure that you as a building owner or a facilities manager, when we turn this over, that you can have confidence. And we'll get into the training aspect of this as well, but that your personnel are adequately trained and knowledgeable to sustain what we are giving you at the end of that project.
Just one thing I just like to point out is, you mentioned submarines. I want you to just think about this. If you've been to any of the classes in the past 2 days, one of them was a couple of them talked about CO2. Well, in our industry, everybody seems to lose their shirt when the CO2 gets above about 1,200 or 1,300 parts per million. Think about a submarine. Submarine can't exactly bring in outside air when it's below the water, right? So they have to reclaim the air. They operate on a regular basis. I think it's either 5,000 or 6,000 parts per million. You take a pilot, he's up in the air, is making all these critical decisions with less air than that and at a higher CO2 level. I'm just saying, just think about how important those things had to be commissioned to make sure they work right, because those are truly life and death. So that's all. I just wanted to just put some perspective on it.
I'm just thinking about how much worse I am than pilots and submarine captains and so forth, that to operate effectively, I need it to be less than 1,200, but they could work okay at those.
That's the thing. I just think it's funny.
Yeah.
That's all.
So one of the definitions I've heard about commissioning, it's quality assurance process, or maybe that's the wrong exact framing and so forth. But what I've heard is that commissioning validates the design. This is a terminal or a definition I've heard. But I kind of want to understand that better. The design is wrong sometimes, or at least ineffective or problematic sometimes, right? And I've also heard that commissioning can start, maybe should start during the design phase. So, how do you kind of reconcile that definition of validates the design with the fact that what if the design's wrong, and aren't we supposedly wanting to start commissioning during design? How do you kind of make those two, that definition and those other things I've heard, work out?
Well, you got to understand that you have a lot of owners. First, they think that when they pay the engineer of record, they're already paying him that the system's supposed to work, right? That commissioning is something that, what am I paying you for? But you gotta understand, every mechanical, electrical engineer, when they put a design together and they put it out on the street, they expect and I'm gonna use the words that makes every single mechanical contractor shudder. It's called means and methods. They assume it's gonna work based on means and methods, but they're not gonna go out there, they don't get paid to confirm that everything is working properly. Now, there's another thing and that's where commissioning comes in. You put the system through the paces. When you do Y, X occurs, and if X occurs, Z will happen. Okay? But we found, and it was kind of interesting, and I will tell you from certainty, 80% of the mechanical engineers that I've met and dealt with in my life couldn't figure out how to do controls if their life depended on it. They copy from the last job and they move on.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
I are a mechanical engineer as well. So I've had...
He's in the 20%.
Right.
So that's...
Well, I had the luxury in my career of starting out in the controls industry and writing sequences of operations and implementing sequences of operation, and then transitioning into the mechanical design world, which is rare, but I agree 100% with what you said about the issue with sequences of operations and mechanical designers. We're trained to size pipe, size ductwork, size pumps, fans, and we can put a system together pretty much that works most of the time.
Right.
But when it comes to controls and operating sequences, it can be pretty challenging for mechanical engineers and design engineers. And so that's where we come in as commissioning providers to be able to provide that additional insight. The what if factor, that my wife, I drive her crazy because it's always in my head, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? You know, we gotta have plan B, plan C, plan D. What are the, the contingency factors here going on? And so when we're doing that and we're working with you as the owner or facilities manager, what kind of scenarios are we supposed to be designing the system around? And we then can help incorporate that into a very repeatable and successful sequence of operations.
But to answer the other part of your question is, should we be brought in the beginning? It's always better to have us in the beginning because we can have the most effect on it. We have I don't know if we have a slide in this. It might be in there where we talk about it's diminishing return. We can have more effect if we're in the beginning of the project than if we are at the end. And I always use the example, I did a hotel in Clearwater Beach, and the hotel was about 2 months from opening, and the owner decides that he's gonna change the spa consultant. And you say, okay, what's the big deal? So, well, the spa consultant comes in, they're like chefs, and they wanna change things and put things in different places. So as we're walking around moving things, I'll never forget this line from the contractor, and we have the spa consultant saying, I want to put this here and I want to put that there. And everything is poured. The building is up. It's a couple of months from opening. And the contractor looks and goes, gentlemen, a chipping gun is not an eraser. So it costs more to make that change later than it would have been in the beginning. We can have that same impact looking at the controls early on, adding different things that are not going to cost more. We can still fix it later, and we have. I'm sure Loren and I have fixed many projects that we got brought in at actually the start of construction, and going through the sequences, go, yeah, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. And you can do it, don't get me wrong, but it's always better to have more impact for as we say, the three abilities: constructability, serviceability, maintainability of a system, by making rooms a little bit bigger and so on. That's where we have the most impact.
Great, thank you. So another question I have about kind of just laying the foundation of this overall, when do we start, what is it, and so forth, is another term I've heard is commissionable equipment. I've heard people talk about this. Well, there's X commissionable equipment, implying that's the subset of all equipment, right? So what defines that boundary, right? What's the, is there some heuristic we can use to say, well, when it crosses this threshold, it's commissionable and otherwise it's not, right? So what puts something into the commissionable equipment bucket, and what do you all generally see as falling, within that definition?
That's a great question. Well, as we talked about the evolution of commissioning through the military and building systems, predominantly it's been mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, the basic infrastructure of your building systems. We've also included fire life safety systems in there as well. And I think that really is the core of what is commissionable systems. But honestly, any building system can be commissioned. It's a process that starts, as we just mentioned, in design. And it's that process of verifying and validating that the system, whatever system that is, has been designed, installed, and is operating per the design intent. So that can include elevators, that can include med gas systems, it can include the envelope itself. We've seen over the last several years, building envelope has increased in importance and in scope of work. Customers that are looking for building envelope in roof integrity, air intrusion, air barriers. We have a client that they want us to commission the doorknobs, the door hardware. And so it's like, I'm commissioning doorknobs now. Okay. So, but seriously, any system that's inside the building can be commissioned. Now, with that said, you also have a budget to deal with as well. So it's time and effort it takes for everything, right? So what are your priorities? What are your high impact systems? And typically when we go back to MEP, that's where your utility consumption, and you as an owner or facilities manager, those are your expenditures. And so we're looking to optimize those systems so you achieve the best energy consumption that you can have over the life of your building. But there may be other priorities that a life safety, for example, or in a critical facility, things that take higher priority than that. So it's flexible, but bottom line, we can commission anything.
And even doorknobs.
Yeah,
Doorknobs.
That's correct. Yeah, that's my line, actually. I said, I'll commission anything, even doorknobs. You have a question?
Yeah, going back to, you mentioned bringing in commissioning during the design phase and everything. How does that conversation look whenever and I'm coming from the experience of a commissioning agent, but your commissioning agent and your engineer are in disagreement.
That never happens.
How a system should operate. And then even going one step further, you get into actual construction phase, and then your controls contractor now has a third observation of how they think the system should operate. What does that conversation look like?
Well, here's the first thing. The engineer of record is the responsible party. It is his license on the line. I have told engineers where something does not work, my opinion, and I've been told to stick it where the sun didn't shine. I'm saying that very candidly. And I would say, fine. I mean, I'll tell you a real quick story. I had a project where I called the engineer, I called the engineer up. I said, look, off the record, I've read through your control sequence. It doesn't work. If we follow it and I put it in and commission it the way you want, we're going to grow geopets on the walls. We're going to have all kinds of humidity problems and so on. He told me I didn't know what I was talking about and to mind my business and to commission it the way he designed it. I said, I'm a Brooklyn boy, so I said some nice things to him after I hung up the phone. But the point is, it's his job, it's his responsibility. Now, I will fire staff if they have ever gone to a client and said, I wouldn't do it that way. You didn't sit in a room, you don't know why, it's not your license on. The control guy, I have a lot of angst with them sometimes also because they half the time, they don't also are forthcoming in telling you everything either. So you got to kind of manipulate through this thing, but at the end of the day, you are the independent third party This is all my opinion and the way ACG sees it. You're the independent third party. You see it how it is. You write it, you document it. They don't have to do anything you say. You don't have any hammer, you don't have any clout unless the owner gives you the clout. That's, at least that's the way I see it.
Yeah. As we talk about the authorities as a commissioning authority, we do not have authority, right? It's true. We can't dictate the design or the construction means and methods, but our role is as an advocate to the owner. And so as such, as Al had explained, our role is to recommend and provide our lessons learned to the team. And if those recommendations are not accepted, then it is our responsibility to help facilitate the success, even if we know it may not happen, but we're trying to drive it towards a successful ending at the end.
I will give you another quick story on that. There was somebody that we saw that the pumps were too small, horsepower was too small. I told them, I wrote it up. I got told, mind my business, fine. The owner said it was out. We get it, we acknowledge it. A year and a half later, I get a phone call, Al, did you send Kevin out? I go, what do you need? He goes, we need to pick a new pump because we can't order it at the top of the building, just like you said. I didn't do it to make that engineer look bad. I was trying to make sure he didn't get that engineer will never do another job for that owner again. And that was not my intent.
Quick interjection. So we'll take a question here. And then I do want to make sure we get through some of this. So after this question, no, go ahead. No problem. But then we'll move through some more before we have additional questions. Go ahead.
So since we're talking about fundamentals, back to your comment about the doorknob, what's the difference between QA, QC, and commission?
Well, quality control, QA, QC, commissioning, QC is more of a production in the details of making sure that every widget is being produced correctly, right? Commissioning is a quality assurance process where we're not actually looking at the means and methods of the contractors, making sure that is being done correctly. That has to do with the general contractor and the design team as well when they're doing their construction administration. The commissioning process is more of a quality assurance of applying this process to make sure that it is meeting the owner's intent. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, the design intent is what I've heard talked about, right? Is kind of commissioning is about the design intent.
Well, I would like to add.
Sure, go ahead.
In my experience, the QC is more like that specific part versus the commissioning is more like a system.
Mm-hmm. Correct. We're not doing QC. That the contractor going through and doing punch list, for example, is QC on their means and methods, and the designer's QC. We're not punch listing the project. We're ensuring that the systems are designed, installed, and operating and documenting that along the way.
But we may have a punch list at the end of the day of things that we find that don't work right or aren't installed properly.
As a byproduct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to sum it up, basically the QA and QC process is being done by the contractors, engineers, subcontractors, vendors, checking their own work.
Yes, correct.
Maybe the contractors checking the sub work as well. We're verifying, the commission agents are actually verifying the operation and coming back as an independent part. That's really the key.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I want to move us into talking a little bit about some of the different types of commissioning. So there's commissioning is an umbrella that actually has multiple kind of sub divisions within it. And I'm going to go through some of these just quickly in terms of naming them. So there's new building commissioning. I think that's pretty evident, right? That's commissioning that happens when you're, we're building a new building, right? New construction. Some of the other ones, though, that are that we've got is so we've got recommissioning, retro commissioning, ongoing commissioning, or there's actually a couple of different names under this we'll get to, but this idea of kind of ongoing or monitoring-based commissioning. And so we have these other ones I want us to kind of talk to. So the first one that I have is recommissioning. And so my question is, what is it, and has anyone ever actually done it?
Did I take that?
Yeah, you can go.
So recommissioning is the process of applying the commissioning process to an existing building that has been previously commissioned. So we have a new constructed building that's gone through the commissioning process. A year later, a couple of years later, 10 years later, we're going to come back and we're going to commission that building again according to the criteria that it was originally set for. And so we're going through basically just a repeat of the commissioning process to make sure that the building systems are still operating in accordance with the original project requirements.
Have you ever done a recommissioning job where you were able to like reference the original commissioning effort that happened in the past?
We've done a lot of recommissioning projects in the past. This is going to lead into retro commissioning later, but
Sure.
We all know that over the course of time, things change, end uses change, sequences of operation change by different means and methods. And so when those end uses do change, but we have been, in some cases, have been able to go back and reference the original commissioning when it's been our projects. Sometimes we're brought on and it's been existing from a previous commissioning provider. But the basis of that is to take what you have and then reapply that process. If you don't have that information, then we're kind of going into a retro commissioning field there.
Yeah, why don't you tell me, so retro commissioning is, you know, a sibling here to the recommissioning. So why don't you just kind of briefly give us what retro is and
Okay.
any differences between these two of note?
So retro commissioning is going into an existing building that has never been commissioned. So it has not had the process applied to the systems. And there is no functional test. You're kind of going into, I refer to it as a Forrest Gump, you know, it's a box of chocolates and we don't know what we're getting into at this point. We're trying to discover how this building is operating. What is the intent? We don't have a design intent. We don't have a baseline. So we're going through a process of establishing, working with the operation and maintenance personnel, with the owner, of how are you currently operating this building? What are your tenants? What is the end usage of this building? And we're going through that design phase, if you will, of seeing what the end use is, what the objectives are, and how the building is being operated, and do they match up? Does it meet the current, what we call a current facilities requirement? When we get into existing building commissioning, that's a document called the CFR, which it's documenting those requirements of the current facility as it is being operated right now. And as a byproduct of that, you're also looking at where are opportunities for energy savings, for increasing the environmental quality of the building through modifying and revising the operating sequences of operation. How can we take what we have and make it better? So in the end, you have things that can be implemented fairly easily, fairly quickly, with low amount of expenditure, which relates into a very low payback, an instant payback on those things.
Al, have you done recommissioning, and if so, have you found it to be materially different from retro commissioning in practice?
Well, this is where my buddy and I only disagree a little bit, because sometimes I think that, to me, retro commissioning is whether the building has ever been commissioned or not, is when you're going to go in and you're going to evaluate the building and see where are there been changes, where a building before might have been operated as a normal office building, now it's a call center, or conversely, it was a call center and it's not, which now has a whole different operating platform, or it went from one shift a day to 3 shifts a day, which now changes everything. And maybe some of the controls have never been set up to adjust for how the building is gonna operate. But one thing I want to at least say is that ASHRAE 230, which is the guideline on retro commission, is now changing the 2 topics that we're just talking about, recommissioning and retro-commissioning. They're now all called existing building commissioning, just so everybody knows. So whatever we're telling you, you can ignore. It's going to, ASHRAE has changed the goalpost is moved again.
So that's interesting. So it sounds like they've kind of have the same concept. They're kind of lumping them together.
Yeah, it makes sense. And they've changed certain things within the guideline that they're just trying to make sure ASHRAE is great with those kinds of ways they do things.
Yeah. So is retro commissioning, I know it's not quite the same, but what's the relationship between retro commissioning and energy audit? Is it a necessary, is that a subcomponent of retro commissioning? You always do an energy audit? Is it totally independent? There's some relationship?
I always recommend that you do an energy audit as part of the retro commission, the precursor to the actual retro commission process. And the reason we do that is that if we're going to go in, there is where we're going to find where you need to make control sequence changes for maybe, let's say, right now, they may have a DEC system, but they've never enacted a static reset sequence into everything, which now is going to reduce horsepower. So that sequence so if we went in and just recommissioned it, we recommission it without that sequence. So now you go in, you get all these sequences done up front, you spend that money, and so this way the building can now operate better, lower their overall EUI of the building, or in the new term, we're going to start talking about, operational carbon. That's, decarbonization. That's the word that we have to adopt these days. And there's embodied carbon and there's operational carbon. Operational carbon is what it's costing to operate the building.
So the result of an energy audit, I agree 100% with you, Al. From an energy audit, you're going to get various energy conservation measures, or ECM. And retro commissioning is an energy conservation measure, an ECM, which then, as we dig deeper into that box of chocolates, we're then identifying other additional measures there. But the energy audit will give you additional items. When we're doing retro commissioning, we're not looking at the light fixtures, for example, and replacing them from T8s or T5s to LEDs, right? And other equipment, perhaps upgrades. We're focused with the existing buildings equipment that we have and taking that and improving it with what we have, where an energy audit is more a wider look at the building and what can we do now to actually impact even more the energy consumption of the building.
Yeah, and to go along with that, like I was talking about yesterday, it's a holistic thing. You're looking at everything. There might be envelope changes that you want to make because windows are leaking, they need to be recaulked, which is now bringing a lot of infiltration into the building when it breathes. So, so there's a lot of things that have to be looked at.
Yeah, this is, for me, I appreciate, this is sort of interesting, is the way you framed it, Loren, or said it, is that an energy audit, the outcome of that is going to be these ECM, energy conservation measures. And one of those energy conservation measures could be a retro commissioning effort.
Yeah.
And then there's others in addition.
Yeah, and it almost always is. The very first one is a retro commissioning process, and there is an associated savings that you assume. If you go back to the Lawrence Berkeley report, originally done in 2009, that said if you retro commissioned the building, an existing building, the savings were anywhere between I want to say 7 and 20%. Yeah. And then when they redid it in 2018, it dramatically dropped to like 3 and 8% or 3 and 9% or something like that, which made a lot of sense. Those 9 or 10 years, the energy conservation had been going on and people have been tweaking the buildings. And so that all those CxEnergy, which was the commercial buildings that they were looking at, and there were thousands of them that they were looking at, all were getting more efficient. So it just made a perfect sense that that's what was happening.
So in regards to these energy savings that, are the focus of certainly the energy audit, but even the retro commissioning itself, that seems to be a driver of what the retro commissioning is trying to do. the one I know about is, which is probably all, there's no opportunity for this anymore, but is switching out all the light bulbs to be LED lights, right? That's the one I've heard about over the years, many times. There's, I'm sure, much more than that. Like, what are some of the other kind of common opportunities for energy savings that retro uncovers?
Demand controlled ventilation, where right now you're bringing in a set amount of outside, even though if you have an air monitoring system, you're still bringing in the same amount of outside air regardless if the building's full of people or there's nobody there. So bringing in demand controlled ventilation, we're sensing how many people are throwing off CO2 into the space will modulate the amount of outside air. So there's, if you think about it, in the state of Florida, I want to say that at last it was running at about $2 a CFM for outside air. It's an expensive thing. So every CFM that you can reduce throughout the life of the building is definitely going to save you energy.
Yeah. Another aspect of that is we've all gone into simultaneous heating and cooling.
Yep.
A lot of that going on where over the years, because of leaky valves, we have a situation where we're heating and cooling simultaneously at the building, wasting a lot of energy at the boilers and the chillers as well. We have outside air in turn with the CO2 control. As part of the retro commissioning process, we're also looking at the end components. So we're having damper actuators, valve actuators. A lot of times damper actuators break. We have an outside air damper that's open 100%, but from the front end, it looks like it's modulating correctly. And no one's ever gone out there to look at the damper. And so it's been 100% this whole time, bringing in, I'm from Phoenix, so you're bringing in 120 outside air to your building during the summer. So there's a lot of those hidden gems that are always common to a retro commissioning process.
Great, thank you. So I want to get to the last kind of sort of separate commissioning discipline or effort. And to do this, I'm going to read a definition, and then I want you guys to tell me what I'm talking about. So my definition here is of a type of commissioning is a process which maintains and continuously improves building performance over time. And my question is that the definition of monitoring-based commissioning, ongoing commissioning, or continuous commissioning?
Yes.
Is there any difference between those? Can you speak to those terms? Is that another thing where ASHRAE's been making changes over time? Or
Continuous commissioning, if you really think about the definition of continuous commissioning is really making sure, because again, I'm going to quote the Lawrence Berkeley report from 2009, where it showed where they monitored the buildings and they saw a degradation in sensors, right? They go out of calibration. And so as sensors go out of calibration, you wind up using more energy. And so they had a whole chart of showing different things, whether it was chill water, outside air, or hot water, steam, and so on, showing what was happening with every single one of them. So what continuous commissioning is someone's going out, taking a look, hey, that sequence is that sensor doesn't look like it's right. You got to go out and replace them and things like that. It's more of a more granular thing that you're making sure you're looking at it and you're being more proactive about it versus monitor-based commissioning where you're looking at it, you're looking at every single piece of equipment against a set guideline. And as anything fall out of parameters and you've set some sort of a flag, if you will, that if it goes out of spec by 2 degrees one way or the other, if it's 2.5 degrees, ET phones home and says there's a problem. And so you send somebody goes out and replaces the sensor. So it doesn't go on for months or years, or decades. We've seen that happen.
So from a liability standpoint, I have to say that continuous commissioning has been trademarked by actually locally at Texas A&M. So we can't use the word continuous commissioning in our publications and things like that. So it's usually referred to as ongoing commissioning. as Al had mentioned, it's just the process of going through each of these systems and applying this commissioning process. And the monitor-based commissioning is a subset of that, as Al had mentioned. Over the course of the last 24 hours, I'm sure most of you have sat in on the workshops on monitor-based commissioning and the different providers that there are there. But monitor-based commissioning has now become a tool for ongoing commissioning to continuously monitor your building and to be able, there's another aspect of monitor-based commissioning which is called automated fault detection. And so it expands on what Al was talking about of identifying different parameters in your building and setting up rules or parameters that you're monitoring your building for these specific parameters of building pressurization or temperature and things. And so the building automation system trend data is uploaded into these diagnostic servers and is able to go through a ton of data in a relatively short period of time. And through the automated fault detection, then bring up to you, okay, we found this anomaly in the data. We need you to look at this because I'm just giving you this anomaly. I'm not sure if it's an anomaly or not, but it looks different. And so we as humans have to look at this and make sure that it's an actual fault, an actual issue or not. But when I started my career when DDC was first implemented and we were doing trend data, it took days to get the trend data out of the system, put it into an Excel spreadsheet, crunch the data, make it into a graph so I could actually see what was going on. But this does it in seconds. It's merged into a tool that allows us to be much more efficient and to cover a lot more ground in less amount of time. And so it's a great tool for ongoing commissioning.
Yeah, and I have a question about that, again, coming from my kind of layperson understanding of these things. So, you know, you mentioned, oh, you're getting the trend data from the BAS, the Building Automation System. I've heard it also called a building monitoring system. So what I wonder about, or I don't have a clear understanding of, is what's the value add of the monitoring-based commissioning over and above? There is a system there already. If commissioning provider wasn't involved at all, there'd still be a BAS system, as I understand it, still be a BMS system. It's got trend data. I think a lot of these systems have alerts and anomaly detection and things like that. Maybe I'm wrong about that. You can clarify. So, I mean, it sort of seems like you're kind of setting up a second parallel BAS system external to the actual BAS system or something. Like, am I wrong about this? Like, where's the value add, or what am I misunderstanding?
Well, I think that's, thanks for the softball on that one. And the reason I'm calling it that is because most people will say that what is and there's one more, is an EMS, an energy management system, so you can confuse all three of them if you'd like. But at the end of the day, one of the problems that you find is that the BMS, EMS or BAS is nothing but a sophisticated time clock, right? It turns systems on and off, okay? If you don't monitor the system, you don't know if it's broken. What you don't monitor, you can't fix. And what ongoing commissioning does is puts focused attention, or monitor-based commissioning puts focused attention on how the system is operating, even if it's weekly or monthly. Where right now, you know, everybody touts that they have facilities, sustainability operators and energy managers and all this other stuff. I've met them all. They're too busy telling me what to do. That they're not, and I'm not complaining, I'm not picking on them. I'm just saying they get a job and they have too many hats that they have to fill. They have to be the public speaker. They have to do all the social media. They have to do everything else. And then when I ask them, okay, you got this great gem system that you just put in on this project. So how's it working? What's the data? I don't know. I can't look at it. I don't have enough time in the day. I got all this other stuff to do. So that's really what the problem is. So hiring someone else to help them becomes a way to get it done.
Yeah, The building automation system, EMS, BAS, BMS, whatever you want to call it, it does a great job also of system alarming. You know, when equipment is on, it's supposed to be off, or vice versa. We have high temperature limits and those kind of things. You will get an alarm from a building automation system. And a monitor-based commissioning platform is not meant to be an alarming system. It's for monitoring the performance of the system. And so, as Al had said, unless I've run into very few operation and maintenance organizations that have enough time to actually take and look at the trend data themselves and analyze the trend data to look on a long-term basis how the systems are being operated. They're putting out fires, they're changing filters, they're busy with their heads on fire all the time. And so the monitor-based commissioning also, in addition to monitoring the performance, you're also being able, through the fault detection, to identify issues that would not come up from a building automation system alarm, such as we talked about simultaneous heating and cooling, leaky valves. That is going to be identified through automated fault detection. Broken dampers and belts, that's going to be detected from a monitor-based commissioning system.
Stuck on.
Yeah, so you get that additional added value of its performance insurance as well. You as an owner have invested this money, and now you have an operation and maintenance personnel that's there to sustain the performance of it, and you have this now as documented proof of insurance for that performance.
Great, thank you. So we got just a little less than 10 minutes, and I want to give an opportunity. We could have more things we talk about, but I think we've got through most of what I hope that we'd be able to discuss. So I want to see if there's any questions here at the end for the last few minutes that we have. Do we have any questions out here that we can address?
Well, one thing I would like to say, my own question.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Is that we were talking about fault detection diagnostics. That is going to become a big thing. It's a growing thing. And in some cases, it's going to be really good, because I see one particular manufacturer, they put a air card in every rooftop that they sell, that ET is always phoning home, telling them what's going on. But they monitor, and they know, like, the bearing temperature starts to get a little warm, or at a spec over so many degrees, it sends them a warning, and they know that compressor is going to fail within the next 2 weeks, because that's been what's been going on, and they have all that data. So you're going to start to see where fault detection diagnostics is going to be a really good thing. Now, AI, everybody keeps talking about AI, artificial intelligence. You're still going to need a human being to take a look at it. Okay, at the end of the day, you still need somebody to understand, because if not, fault detect, I think it was Lawrence Berkeley Labs did this great report, and they found that they got, for one office building, they had, like, in 1 month, they had 3,500 alarms on VAV boxes and things like that. Well, it's white noise, because not all of it, because you have to set, as Loren said, you're going to set the parameters. And the reason you got to do that, or otherwise, anybody here ever been around when the filters all have to be changed at about the same time, and they get a series of 300 alarms that says every one of their filters are in alarm? What does the building engineer do? He ignores them all. And sometimes he ignores the ones that are important, that are not the white noise in the background. So you got to put the bigger parameters in and show up only the ones that are going to be important for you to take care of.
Yeah, it's interesting in the answers you were saying. Something I was thinking about is, if we're going to call, we have this monitoring-based commissioning term, and monitoring-based commissioning. So, the commissioning is still there, which I think of, I sort of interpret as, the human element, right?
Yes.
It's the expertise. It's someone that has experience in this. So it's not just monitoring, it's monitoring-based commissioning. And so that becomes a tool, an informational tool.
Yes.
That feeds into a similar commissioning process as anything else we're going through. What do you all think about? My understanding also is that the monitoring-based commissioning is being used on more than just this sort of operational ongoing commissioning, that it's something that is getting brought in more and more during new construction, maybe during retro, I don't know. I mean, is that, am I right about that? Is that something
Yes.
you see that's going to happen?
Yeah.
Is going to continue to increase?
Well, it's not only a tool for post-occupancy monitoring, it can be used during the commissioning process, during the new construction process of assisting the commissioning provider with functional testing. It's, depending on the scope and the budget that you have in your contract, if you have 1,000 VAV boxes, you've got to look at, and even sampling 20% of those, 200, the monitor-based platform and going through the fault detection, it would help you go through all 1,000 boxes in the same time as you would traditionally to look at the 200. And so I believe that it is a tool that as we move forward in this industry, and we're going to be having to use those tools to become more efficient in what we do. And so it definitely is in new construction and retro commissioning as well. It's a great tool to be able to identify the ECMs that we talked about there.
Great. So last call for any questions here. Do you have well, we'll go to the back, and then Dave, go to you afterwards.
So I know that in my area, energy benchmarking, has that had any impact on commissioning? How does that interact?
Well, benchmarking is the cornerstone of an energy audit. That is the precursor to everything that you do, because you have to understand, is the building efficient or it's not efficient? So it is the beginning of all that we need to do when you start talking about existing building commissioning and energy audit. So it has to be done, and that's how sometimes I would go and for a REIT, and I would look at all their assets, and they want to figure out what they have to do. So you benchmark all their buildings if they're not already in cities that are mandated, and then you look at them all, and now you can say, okay, the building with an Energy Star score of 40, and 100 being the best, these are the ones you should start looking at. The one that's got a score of 98, yeah, we can wait for that one until later, kind of thing. So, did I answer your question? Sorry.
In us right here, what do you guys think is more important, people skills or technical skills?
Both.
For the commissioning or for
As commissioning providers.
I think it's both, because I think you have to have, I said it many times, that the commissioning agent is the glue that brings it, should be everybody together and not the acid that drives them apart. So you have to have a personality to be able to make, because you're the one that has to pull everybody together. At least that's my opinion.
Well, I've been married for 27 years now, and as my wife tells me, it's not what you said, it's how you say it, right? And so I think there is a balance between, you have to have the technical knowledge, obviously.
Yes.
But we are, as a commissioning provider and as independent third party, we have to work within that realm of design team, construction team, and working as a separate entity from them, but helping and facilitating all of us working together. And so it does take people skills to be able to do that. And I think one of the best things that my employer did early on in my career was he had me go to a Dale Carnegie workshop where I had to learn to make friends and influence people, right? And so, but that's definitely a good balance between the two.
There are codes and standards that drive commissioning requirements and specs, like LEED or FGI, IECC. There's a line in 318 and on that for IECC that requires commissioning of that involves demonstration of an emergency condition. Do you interpret that same or different than commissioning emergency power system? How do you address emergency condition commissioning as required by IECC?
Well, first, you're absolutely correct. And during our design review, we're making sure that those scenarios are covered by the design team. And we want to sit down with the owner's representatives, with operation and maintenance, and we want to define what that emergency response is, whether it be power outage and loss of utilities. And then we are applying that commissioning process with our functional tests, our site inspections, and verifying. We can get into what's called an integrated systems test at the end, where it's basically a blackout test to where we're dropping the utility power from the building, and it's the final show, right? We're dropping the power. We're watching the transfer switches turn over to emergency power. Generators switch on. UPS is there in the middle, and we're verifying all of that switch over with life safety, with HVAC, and all the connected systems. So it could be as much as that, or it could be just a subset of that. But it's really based on the criteria that we're setting forth up front in the project requirements.
All right. We have to end now after that question. Thanks for your participation. Let's round of applause for our panelists here. Thanks, everyone.